I just collected the stories and I gave them the stories. And that's when they started to accept me, like, okay, so you're not judging us, you're just informing us so that we can become better doctors that we already are, but we can also create more quality in our care for people. And when I went to Canada to talk about listening to young people with cancer and talked about the importance to listen to these young people, because their questions are not the same as seniors have when they got cancer. It's really different because they are students, they are exploring life. And so when I came back and told the professors, this is what I'm doing and this is what I'm believing, they started really to ask me, can you listen to my patients?
Leadership Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Leadership Story Talks is produced by Narrative, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. I'm Jerome DeRoy, CEO of Narrative.
And I'm Julienne Ryan, and it's great to be here.
Before we move on to introducing our guest, I want to remind our listeners to subscribe to the podcast Leadership Story Talks, wherever you find your podcasts. Leave a review. And you can also check out our YouTube channel, where we also archive all of our episodes, and narrative.com/podcast. That's NARATIV.com/podcast, where once again, you can find all of our previous episodes. All right. So without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce our next guest, with whom we have a long history at Narrative. Our guest is Corine Jansen. She was born in Amsterdam and she's now thriving in Breda. Corine boasts of over 3 decades of experience in communications and management across diverse sectors. Her passion for listening and compassion led her to remarkable roles, including the Chief Listening Officer at the Reshape Center for Healthcare Innovation, focusing on impactful interactions with cancer patients and their families. Corine's dedication to listening propelled her to become the first Dutch person to complete the Certified Listening Professional Program, earning her numerous awards for her contributions. In 2023, she co-founded the Global Listening Movement with Professor Avi Kluger and Adi Segal, with the aim of leveraging listening to address both personal growth and global challenges. Beyond her professional achievements, Corine volunteers her skills to foster empathy through listening, working with organizations worldwide. Inspired by the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, she lives by the ethos of listening, learning, and connecting. And for anyone who's been listening to our podcasts, this will all sound very related to many of our subjects and topics, as listening is one of the key foundations of everything we talk about and everything we do. So really so happy to have you on this show, Corine. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jerome.
Well, maybe we can start, actually, since on that note, kind of a point of transition from the sort of the bio that I read, which is, leans heavily on listening. Maybe you can tell us more about how you would define listening and why you talk about listening with rather than to people.
Yeah. It's interesting. Last year and months before, I spoke with Professor Avi Kluger about a new definition of listening, and we were searching for a way to explain what we really experience when we are listening and when we are listening to. And he wrote a paper on this issue with Moran Mishrai. I hope I pronounced her name well. And they proposed that that listening is the degree to which a person devotes themselves to co-explore with the other and for the other. And that really resonates with me because that is really informed by the views of Martin Buber and Emmanuel Levinas. It's all about the dialogue with the other. And when I'm thinking about listening with the other, because I always mention I want to listen with people and not always to people, for me, it's about not sitting across a person and getting the best possible understanding always. For me, it's more about getting into what that person feels, what's behind the words, even the stuff, what they don't say aloud. And that means that I try to create a safe space where we are together, being with each other, and not necessarily listen to a linear story or a story with a beginning or a plot and an ending. I don't need to paraphrase. It's just sometimes throwing words around. Sometimes it's music, sometimes it's even art. And that's about listening with. It's about the vibe of sharing and finding out the things with the speaker without judgment, and figuring out the story as it comes, because we don't know. So it's, yeah, no scripts, no questions, no predefined questions, no checklist or something like that. Sometimes I say it's like going on a journey together and just find out what is waiting to be said. And that's for me the difference between listening to or listening with, because for me that is really an ethical choice. I choose to travel with you, and maybe I will not understand. Maybe I can go along with you, but it doesn't matter, because there are no boundaries and there are no hierarchies. There's only humanity. And that's the most important thing for me when I try to listen with someone. And so that's more than only the content.
Yeah.
And that is beautiful how you described it. And one word came to mind when you were explaining how you work and you listen. It was fluidity. There was a flow to how you were describing all these elements that informed your experience with the person. And the colleague and the founder, I found something that was very beautiful on the listening site about how he had oneness. He was saying true listening gives you a oneness in the experience. And I think that's something to keep in mind for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. There's so much in what you said, Corine, in that sort of definition of listening with rather than to. And one of the things that I really resonate with, which is not an easy thing to do, is, and it's probably not a doing, it's more a way of being, which is that you mentioned, you know, listening without judgment. And that is something that in our field, and you even said, for so that the story can come out, right, or something like that. Now I'm paraphrasing, but you know, this idea of listening without judgment is something that we at Narrative, you know, have to do a lot of work around with our clients and people we work with, because it's probably the number one thing that keeps people from really being present, you know. And so I wonder what your take is on adopting such a stance? Because I'm sure it's not just innate, right? Because we all have judgments all the
Yeah,
time. So
yeah.
how does that, what's been your experience of being able to bring that kind of listening without judgment?
I think yeah, I totally agree. We all have judgments, but when you are aware of your judgments, you can set them aside.
Mm,
And I think we should take more time to self-awareness and to reflection to become aware of our own instruments. How do we resonate with people with different views or different morals? Um, and am I really curious to know the other or to get an answer I really want to hear? So is it about my own curiosity or is it really about the curiosity for the other? And that's why I resonate so strongly with Emmanuel Levinas. And I write always the other with caps lock, because when you remind yourself, it's not about you, not now, because I choose to listen to you and I choose to listen, well, for me, with you, it's really not about me.
mm,
So
mm,
the ego is the enemy at that time. And you need to be aware of that. And we all have ego and we all have judgments and assumptions. And that's very human. But being aware of that can be really helpful to become a better listener.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and really again relates very much to our work when we get people to realize what are those judgments and what are those assumptions and how often they come in and why. And there's some pretty deep work that can happen there, but without that, it's really hard to get something really genuine out of a relationship. Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious about this, the global listening movement, and how did that come about? How does something like that happen?
How did that come about? I think that the purpose was that we really wanted to have people from different backgrounds from all over the world who experienced firsthand the transformative power of listening.
Mm, mm,
So it was not about knowledge, it was not about age, it was not about background, but just experiencing, yeah, it changed me, or it was so helpful, or it really transformed my life. And while we were talking, Adi, Avi, and I, we mentioned that we love to be eternal students of listening. And I think as we are sitting here, we know a little bit more about listening because this is our job. But it doesn't mean that you're a good listener always, every time, with every person. So we decided who would like to be an eternal student in listening? And we just started. And we don't have a board, we don't give prizes, we don't have minutes. We are just there together, listening with each other, learning with each other, and sharing. And we try to enhance our listening skills, and viewing ourselves as eternal students makes us a community where people sometimes say, this is my tribe, because I can fail, I can ask questions, I can ask help, I can share my experience, I can share stories, because everything is allowed, because we're all learning and experiencing. And we are a community, I think, in more than 30 different countries already. We are growing very strongly. And what we're offering is a webinar every month where you can share your story. If it's related to listening, it's okay. Don't talk about money, because that's not the purpose. And we try to have conferences in person, to meet people from different countries with different cultures. We had the first one in the Netherlands in December. We had people from 10 different countries. And we were just experiencing the transformative power of listening. And yeah, we hope that we can explore the unknown together, but also experience the importance of empathy. What is empathy? What can we do with it? But also force meaningful connections. I've met people from countries I've never been to, and I learned so much from them. They are from a different country, different religion, everything can be different. And so, yeah, the main goal is being curious and practicing humility. Yeah.
Wow, beautiful.
I know when I heard about your organization, I found it was just really uplifting to just know something like this existed. And it felt like such a counterpoint to a lot of the negative things we hear, how people are communicating with each other or the method they choose to use when they're doing so. So I was like, that's good news. So I think just the knowledge that you exist is going to brighten up a lot of people's experience and give a sense of optimism that it's possible. And I love the fact you have no board minutes and agendas.
No.
That's brilliant. That spoke to me on a few levels.
That was really important, Julienne. That was really important. No structure, just embracing humanity. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, on that note, Julienne, that you just mentioned, you know, it's great to know that something like this exists. When I was reading your introduction, and one of the ways that we found each other and know each other was through your experience in the healthcare field, especially as a chief listening officer. I don't know if since then there have been more titles and roles like that, but certainly when you and I met, or when I heard of you the first time, I looked at that title and I was wondering if there was some kind of typo or mistake. You know, is this really chief listening officer? Because I certainly could understand it, you know, because of where I come from and what we do, but it seemed just so extraordinary. And so I'd love to ask you about that, about how did you get such a title, and what does that entail?
Yeah. It's an amazing story. I need to go back to 2009. I was on Twitter. I was head of communication of a broadcast, and I was listening to the listeners of our broadcast. And I was typing in 120 characters about my encounters with those people. Who are they? What do they want? What do they want? What would they like to hear? And stuff like that. And then I got a direct message through Twitter. If you ever searching for a new job, please contact me.
Wow.
And well, I'm curious. So I said, well, I don't drink coffee, but I would like to have a cup of tea. And so the next day we had an appointment, and he asked me to become a chief listening officer. And I said, what? And he said, well, I didn't invent the name. The name was invented by Kodak and Dell. And they invented it when social media came up. So people started to listen to the people online. And I said to him, I'm not an online person. So I want to meet people in person. And he said, well, if you would like to work in a hospital, you can listen to our patients, to our doctors, to our nurses.
Wow.
But we like this title. And I was really uncomfortable with this title, Jerome, on first, because I thought I'm chief of nobody. So why should I wear this title? But it was a great title because we got a lot of publicity. And so people started talking about the importance of listening because of this title. And and that was the beginning of a long journey. And I noticed that some people take the role in different ways, and some called it chief experience officer, and I like that one too. But because of the title and the work, we got publications in the British Medical Journal, but also recognized by Gardner. And then it all started. So it was a marketing definition, chief listening officer. And we just had to find out what it really meant for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a great story. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah, that's a great story. And just the power of words, right? What we choose to call something. And what's also striking to me is the willingness to, because for a hospital, I mean, hospitals have been around forever. And so you do things a certain way, and I'm sure there are roles that have the same titles, even though they might have evolved, right? Or changed. And so the idea of, having this, changing this title, or giving this a title that no one had heard of before, is already a pretty brave thing to do. And so then that it would have generate all this publicity is really great. So I guess the question I have is, what were some of the kind of highlights or outcomes that you noticed happened as a result of having this role of chief listening officer?
Having someone with this role was an entrance for a lot of patients to ask for help. So I got a lot of phone calls. Can you just come and listen to me? And they asked, sometimes they ask me and not a psychologist or a social worker, because it is a free role. It's just human with another human. And that was, I think, the most important thing what this hospital accomplished, with announcing a person without a medical background, but just being a human being, available for everyone who is involved in the hospital. So at first, some of the professors were really shocked. What, do we have chief listening officer? What do you think you're doing here? But I only gave them the stories of their patients. I never said, you did something wrong, or this is my advice. I never. I just collected the stories and I gave them the stories. And that's when they started to accept me, like, okay, so you're not judging us, you're just informing us so that we can become better doctors that we already are, but we can also create more quality in our care for people. And when I went to Canada to talk about listening to young people with cancer, and talked about the importance to listen to these young people, because their questions are not the same as seniors have when they got cancer. It's really different, because they are students, they are exploring life. And so when I came back and told the professors, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I'm believing, they started really to ask me, can you listen to my patients? So your question about the outcome is that we tried to set a culture where it was okay to ask for help, to ask for more context around the data we are collecting as medical professionals. And also, again, embracing that we are all humans and we are working, or we are a patient, or we are a caregiver, but we are all in the same building, dealing with the fact of illness and grief and loss and pain in our own way. And the board of the hospital was really helpful, because they always asked everyone, did you ask the people who are involved in your change or in your innovation? Because if they're not, we can't go through with this, because we need to listen to the people who have benefits from this or not having benefits from this. So you need to explain it. And so it was amazing. And I don't know if I can create a paper. So this is the science behind my role. I don't think so. But having so much focus on the importance of listening in such vulnerable environments, that made a change.
Yeah, yeah.
It really struck me when you're describing working with the patients in both of those settings, how it ties back also, it kind of complements what I liked about the narrative method when I started to study it and met the narrative group in Jerome, because I had to learn, let's be specific, to tell the story and let it sit. And not to do, well, the post-game analysis of the story is point A, B, and C. Be brave enough just to let it sit with the audience or the group and let them take it in. And I think, if I'm correct, that's a little bit of how you're describing it, to let the doctors experience the story you're handing up to them, learn from it, maybe learn some more later on when they reflect again, and take it with them.
That's what I try to do, Julianne, because, well, as you all know, sharing stories is such an impactful activity, and it doesn't need any explanation. It's just a story, and that's the power of the story. And I think, because it was an academic hospital, it was really brave of them to involve me in the process and let them self-reflect on their treatment, on their behavior, on their communication with people in very vulnerable states. And I didn't do anything about it. I just collected and gave back. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very powerful. And, those stories that you're collecting and handing over, they have such, there's a lot of emotion in those stories, obviously. And then there's also a lot of information. So the information that they pack is given with that emotional resonance. So it's going to stick a lot better. People are going to remember that and be able to act on the information that the stories contain in a much more, effective way, and be able to prioritize in a way. Because when you're given a list of recommendations, usually what happens is, okay, well, let's do the top 3 recommendations, and then let's see how much they cost. But when you get it as a story, you receive it very, very differently, and so your priorities might change because of how you feel about it. And that's in a hospital setting in particular, but I would venture to say really in any setting, when you think about what your priorities are as a business, or, if you're dealing with people, right? That's what I'm getting from this conversation, is that we're just trying to get to the human being essentially through this. And so any business that's dealing with people, I think would really benefit from hearing this, and sort of looking at stories and listening as a way to gather the real genuine information you need that your consumers, customers really care about, instead of what's my budget? What do I think is happening here according to my CEO or my salesperson, whatever, which, it's all valid, but there's
Mm.
often that missing piece that you're talking about. Like, what's going on with the consumer? What do they really care about? What's going on with the patient? What's going on there? So, I don't have a question around this. It's more a
He's saying it
reflection.
helps with context.
Exactly. I'm
It gives it
contextualizing.
context.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
I'm contextualizing. But now I do have a question now, because we've talked about the global listening movement. We've talked about your role in this healthcare setting, the hospital setting. And I know that you've now taken also a similar role, but in government in the Netherlands. And very curious to hear about that, and what does that entail?
Yeah. Well, I'm not the chief listening officer in the government.
You should.
Yeah, we need one in the US, that's for sure.
Well, no, the government asked me to train the employees working in government. And I think I like that also a lot, because dealing with patient story taught me about the value of listening, to understand the complexities of an individual situation, an illness. But this understanding of the complexity is also crucial in government. And what I try to explore and experience with them is, how do you listen to the citizens of our country? And what do you miss? And are you taking a perspective, or are you getting a perspective? And if you're taking a perspective, what will be the outcome, instead of when you're trying to get a perspective? Because if you try to get a perspective, you need to have to listen and make a choice for a real dialogue, not a debate, just a dialogue. And so my approach is informed by empathy and helping them to understand how you can involve others to create the best policy for the country. And that means that you have to listen, but you also need to be aware that you need people that will listen to the stories of those people. So what I see is that our government is willing to listen, but they often don't give the audience. So people are sharing words and stories and emotions and stuff like that. But if there's no audience, there is no experience of how things can be changed, or the perspectives people have on their daily life. And I try to combine that with a lot of exercises to let them reflect and get more awareness of their own instrument and their capability to do it in a different way.
Wow, that's beautiful, and yeah, once again, much needed work. It seems in this world.
In the world, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at the time, and we have time for a couple more questions. But there's a question that we ask of all of our guests, and so I'm going to ask you that, and now's the time to ask you that question too. What is an experience that has shaped who you are today, still continues to inform your work, your decision-making process?
I knew you were gonna ask me that question, and it was really hard for me to think about what brought me here. And I think I have to be honest. My childhood and my upbringing have shaped me. No, have shaped the person I am today.
Hmm.
I grew up with my mom, who faced psychiatric challenges, and that gave me really a unique environment. And she taught me at a very young age the importance of trying to empathize with her perspective. And that was a huge struggle. And I didn't understand her worlds, but needing to empathize with that was hard, because I couldn't grasp her mind. I couldn't understand it. Most of the time, her storytelling was not linear. It was very unpredictable. So she was unpredictable in her narratives, but also in her actions. And I think that my mom, in her own way, was teaching me a very vital life skill, the ability to look beyond the surface, to understand that everyone has their own story, often very complex and fraught with challenges we may know nothing about. Mm. And this skill has become my cornerstone. And it's for me, it's more than just empathy. It's truly connecting with others and understanding them, or trying to understand them on a level that goes beyond the verbal, but also the visible. And I'm an eternal student, but I think she gave me that skill to focus on.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that experience. And it also, talk about contextualizing. It gives us so much context for your work and where you come from and how you are where you are, right? And I think the great reminder for our listeners and everyone is that empathy is a skill. It is something that you develop and have to develop and have to teach if you're a parent, or, I feel like these are, or anyone really, in a position where you're managing people. I feel like empathy is one of those things that, if you're dealing with people, once again, it's something we have to learn. We may have different ranges of it, but everyone can learn this. And I think sometimes we think, oh, well, that's an innate thing. No, you can work on it. You can work on it. So wonderful. Thanks again for sharing that beautiful story. And I'm curious, we've talked about so many different kinds of resources and, things that people can look at, like the global listening movement. And, I'm sure people will also look up the role of chief listening officer and what that means today and all that sort of stuff. But what would you like to leave with our listeners? And of course, we'll add all of these things into our episode's notes. But is there something that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Be brave and connect. Be vulnerable, because that's your power. And let yourself be inspired by art. It can be a painting, it can be a book, it can be music, because for me, these are the resources which makes us human.
Beautiful. I love it. I'm going to go to a museum right now. That's what I'll do.
Good for you.
Well, really, thank you so much, Corine. This has been a wonderful conversation. Very inspiring. At least I'll speak for myself. I'm sure Julienne
Of course, yes.
agrees.
I'm like thinking of everything else I wanted to ask you and talk about.
I know. Yeah, we'll definitely have to do a part 2, because the global listening movement is very nascent and, it just started last year. So I'd love to come back in a few months or a year maybe, and so that we can reconnect and talk about that a little bit more. There's so much to discuss. Yeah, yeah. Well, great. Thanks so much. Before we go, I would love to remind our listeners that if you have been inspired, as I have been certainly, by this session, please consider enrolling yourself and your team in our group and one-on-one training programs that focus exactly on the kinds of things we talked about today. We focus on listening. We focus on non-judgmental listening in order to find, craft, and tell stories that are compelling and that people will remember and that will cause them to take an action. This is for leadership development, sales, team building, and employee engagement. You can go to narrative.com to enroll, NARATIV.com to enroll. We are always ready to listen to you. So as always, thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, and go on YouTube because all of that drives word of mouth. Thanks so much. Until next time, thanks, Julienne, for co-hosting once again.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks, Corine, for being with us. All right,
Thank
see you next
you.
time. Thanks.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.